Welcome to a deep dive, everybody. Today, it's all about copyright.
Copyright, always a hot topic.
You bet. And we're going straight to the source. Wikipedia's entry on copyright.
Yeah, Wikipedia. A treasure trove of information on pretty much everything.
Exactly. So get this, before the printing press came along. Back in the 15th, 16th centuries, this whole idea of copyright, it basically didn't exist.
It's true.
What was going on back then? Was it just a free-for-all with manuscripts?
It was a different world. Back then, knowledge, it was like this shared resource, something to be passed around, built upon, kind of collectively. Copying wasn't really a huge concern, partly because, well, can you imagine having to hand copy a whole book? It's a massive undertaking.
Yeah, talk about a long day at the desk.
Exactly.
So it seems like the printing press kind of throws a wrench into everything.
It's a game changer for sure.
Because suddenly everyone can make copies.
Mass production.
Mass production. And I'm guessing that led to some conflict, right?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the Wikipedia article mentions these huge fees that authors were getting for their new works, which just goes to show how much money was suddenly tied up in this idea of who gets to copy what.
Wow.
And that connection between copyright and economics. It's a theme we see again and again throughout its history.
So those early authors, they were like the rock stars of their day.
Pretty much. Their words were valuable.
Their words were gold. But then 1710 rolls around, and we get this thing called the Statute of Anne.
The Statute of Anne, a landmark moment in copyright history.
A landmark moment.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound very exciting, but this is big.
Oh, this is huge. This statute, it's often considered the first real copyright law, a direct response to all the upheaval that the printing press brought about. The goal, to bring some order to the chaos by giving authors and publishers the exclusive right to copy and share those works, but only for a limited time.
So it's like, okay, printing press, you're changing the game. We need some rules.
We need some ground rules.
And one thing I found interesting in the article is that the Statute of Anne, it mentions artists' rights, too. Was that unusual back then to kind of lump them in with writers?
That's a really interesting question. The Wikipedia article, it kind of skims over that detail, but it does seem to suggest that, yeah, there was this idea of individual rights for artists, even back then.
Yeah.
Whether it was groundbreaking or just business as usual, we'd have to dig a little deeper to be sure.
Another mystery to solve. But moving on from 18th century legal dramas, the article talks about how the U.S. and Europe, they kind of went their separate ways when it came to copyright.
They did.
What's the deal with this authors' rights idea that Europe went with?
So both sides of the Atlantic, they wanted to protect creators. That was the goal. But their approach, it differed.
Okay.
The U.S. went with the term copyright, pretty straightforward.
Oh.
It's the right to make copies. Europe, though, they preferred authors' rights.
Interesting.
It's a bit more about the ongoing connection between a creator and their work, even after they've, sold it.
Oh, fascinating. So different paths, but ultimately the same goal.
Exactly. Protecting creators.
And to make things even more interesting, the article mentions this thing called the Berne Convention.
Right. An attempt to kind of get everyone on the same page internationally.
An attempt at harmony.
Exactly.
Did it work?
Well, the Berne Convention, it was a huge step towards standardizing things on a global level for sure. But those core differences between how the U.S. and Europe view copyright, those are still around today, which I think speaks to how deeply these different philosophies are rooted in their respective legal systems.
It's like trying to get everyone to agree on the perfect cup of coffee.
Right. Everyone's got their own taste.
Everyone's got their own style. Speaking of things that are free and open to everyone, the article also talks about the public domain.
The public domain.
It's like this magical land where copyrights go to.
Where they go to expire.
To expire, exactly. But
Yeah.
It's a bit more nuanced than that, right?
It is. Think of it less like a graveyard for copyrights and more like this giant, ever-growing library. When a work enters the public domain, it doesn't disappear. It's actually the opposite. It becomes part of this commons, free to be copied, shared, built upon without any permission or fees.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm starting to like the sound of this public domain.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Well, I'm happy to.
So it's like this massive creative commons, constantly expanding as new works enter the mix.
Exactly.
What kind of stuff can you find in there?
Oh, you name it. Classic literature, music, artwork, even old films, all just waiting for someone to come along and, breathe new life into them. Adaptations, remixes, the possibilities are endless. It's like a playground for creativity.
It's like a gift to future
It
creators.
really is.
But okay, let's jump back to the present day for a second.
Mhm.
The article mentions that in a lot of places, you don't even have to register for copyright anymore. It just kind of happens automatically.
That's right.
So I write a poem on a napkin boom, copyrighted.
Pretty much. In most countries that have signed on to the Bahrain Convention, copyright protection kicks in the moment you create something in a tangible form. No forms, no fees, just like that. Your poem on a napkin, copyrighted.
Wow, that's wild.
That is pretty amazing.
So much for mailing yourself a sealed envelope for that poor man's copyright. Does that even hold up legally, by the way?
Nope. It's a myth.
Yeah.
A total myth. Mailing yourself a copy, it might feel official, but legally speaking, it doesn't really do anything. Especially not compared to that automatic protection you get in those Bahrain Convention countries.
Good to know. But the article does mention that registering your copyright can still be a good idea. Why bother if it's already automatic?
Think of registration as like your backup band. You might not always need them, but they're good to have around when things get complicated.
Okay, I like that.
It's like having that extra layer of proof.
Proof that you created it, right.
Exactly. If you ever have to go to court to defend your copyright, having that registration can be a lifesaver. It makes your case so much stronger.
It's like having a receipt for your creativity.
That's a great way to put it.
Speaking of getting into the nitty-gritty, the article dives into this idea of fixing a work in a tangible medium.
Ah, yes.
Sounds a bit technical.
It sounds more complicated than it is.
So what's the deal with this fixation thing?
Remember how we were saying that copyright protection is automatic in many countries once a work is fixed? Well, this basically means that the work needs to exist in some kind of concrete form.
It can't just be like an awesome song idea stuck in my head.
Exactly. Until you get that song out of your head, write it down, record it, something like that is not protected.
It's like, show me the goods. You've got to be able to point to something and say, this is mine.
You got it. It's all about having proof.
Proof. Makes sense. But, this whole fixed in a tangible medium thing, the article mentioned that the U.S. and Canada are a bit stricter about this than some other places.
That's true.
How so?
Well, while a lot of countries that follow the Berne Convention, they allow for a bit more flexibility, the U.S. and Canada tend to be more rigid in requiring this whole fixation thing.
Yeah.
It just goes to show that even with international agreements, there can be subtle differences in how each country interprets the rules.
It's like those easy assembly instructions that are anything but.
Right. Always more complicated than they seem.
Okay, so let's say I've navigated all the legal hurdles, my work is fixed, maybe even registered. What exactly does copyright allow me to do?
Ah, the perks of copyright ownership.
Give me the rundown.
Owning a copyright gives you a whole bundle of exclusive rights. It's like having your own creative control panel. These rights, they give you the power to decide how your work is used, copied, shared with the world.
So, like, no one can just steal my brilliant ideas and make $1 million bucks?
That's the general idea. Copyright is all about giving creators control over their work. For example, if you write a best-selling novel, no one can just turn it into a movie without getting your permission first.
That's why those movie credits always list the authors of the books they're based on.
Precisely. Copyright in action.
But I'm guessing in the age of the internet, this whole thing gets a bit more, shall we say, complicated.
You could say that. The digital world, it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it makes it incredibly easy to share and access creative work.
True.
But on the other hand, it also makes it incredibly easy to copy and distribute work without permission. It sparked this huge debate about how to balance the rights of creators with the free flow of information online.
It's like trying to put a fence around a wildfire.
That's a great analogy.
Speaking of things that are hard to control, the article also mentions that copyright, it's not all powerful. There are limits.
That's right. Copyright isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card. It doesn't mean you have absolute control over every single use of your work.
So there are some things people can do with copyrighted work without needing my permission.
Exactly. Yeah. For example, remember that whole idea-expression dichotomy we touched on earlier? Copyright, it protects your specific expression of an idea, not the underlying idea itself.
Okay, so I can't copyright the idea of, let's say, a detective novel.
Right.
But I can copyright my specific detective character and the unique mysteries they solve.
Exactly. Copyright, it's about protecting the unique way you express an idea. The specific words you use, the characters you create, those are what's protected.
So it's the difference between writing a song about heartbreak and just straight up copying someone else's hit song about heartbreak.
Exactly.
Got it. Now, what about fair use? That always seems to be a tricky one.
Fair use. It's definitely one of the most debated aspects of copyright law. And for good reason, there's no easy answer, no magic formula.
So how do you know if something falls under fair use?
Well, in the U.S., for instance, there are four main factors that courts look at.
Hit me with them.
Okay, first, there's the purpose and character of the use, like, are you using the copyrighted work for commercial purposes or something more educational?
Okay, that makes sense.
Then there's the nature of the copyrighted work itself. Is it a factual work or something highly creative?
Right.
And then there's the amount and substantiality of the portion used. Are we talking a few lines from a song or the whole song?
Got it.
And finally, there's the effect of the use upon the potential market for the original work. Is your use going to harm the creator's ability to profit from their work?
So it's really a judgment call?
Often, it is. It's about balancing the rights of copyright holders with the public's interest in being able to use copyrighted works for certain purposes.
It sounds like the best way to avoid a copyright lawsuit is to get permission first.
You know what they say, it's better to ask forgiveness than permission.
Or is it the other way around?
You know, I always get those two mixed up. But either way, getting permission is usually a good idea when in doubt.
Now, I know we've been talking a lot about limitations, but
Yeah.
owning a copyright, it's not like a life sentence, right? You can actually transfer it to someone else if you want to, or even license it out.
Absolutely. You're the boss of your copyright. You can sell it, give it away, or, as you said, license it out through an agreement. That's very common in creative industries.
So if I'm a musician who signs with a record label, I might be giving them the right to use and share my music in exchange for, a cut of the profits.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Though those agreements can get really complex, so it's always important to make sure you understand what you're signing.
And always read the fine print, right?
Always read the fine print.
Speaking of different ways to share your work, the article also mentions these things called open or free licenses.
Ah, yes. These are interesting.
They sound pretty well open.
They are. They represent a different way of thinking about copyright, especially in the digital age. Open licenses, they allow creators to give broader permission to use their work, often with certain conditions.
So instead of locking down my work with traditional copyright, I could release it under an open license, and people could use it, adapt it, maybe even sell those adaptations.
You've got it. As long as they follow the terms of the license, of course. A great example is Creative Commons. They offer a whole range of licenses that creators can choose from, depending on how they want their work to be used.
It's like choosing your own adventure for your copyright.
Exactly. You get to decide how open you want to be. It really highlights how copyright can be a tool for collaboration and sharing, not just restrictions.
So it's really about creators having choices, different options for how they want their work to be used and shared. But we've talked a lot about what copyright allows us to do. What about the things it doesn't cover? The article mentions some limitations, right?
Absolutely. And one that often surprises people is something called the first sale doctrine.
The first sale doctrine. Okay, I'm intrigued.
Basically, it means that once you've bought a legitimate copy of something, a book, a CD, whatever, you're generally free to resell that specific copy without needing to get permission from the copyright holder.
So that's how used bookstores can exist. Makes sense. It's like if I own this physical book, I should be able to sell it if I want to, right?
Right. Copyright law, it focuses on controlling the making of copies and the distribution of those copies.
Yeah.
But once you've legally purchased a copy, well, you've got that specific item. It's like owning anything else. You could usually sell it or give it away.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
The creator gets their due when the work is first sold.
Exactly.
And then after that, it's fair game for the used market. Are there other exceptions like this that might surprise people?
You know, a lot of people don't realize that copyright law in many countries doesn't actually stop you from doing certain things with your own legally purchased copy. Like, let's say you buy a poster
Okay, I've got my poster.
and you decide, you know what, I'm feeling creative. I'm going to paint over this poster. Go for it.
I can do that.
You can totally do that. You just can't start making copies of your newly painted masterpiece and selling them without permission.
Ah, okay. So I'm guessing belting out a karaoke version of my favorite song in my shower is fine,
Totally fine.
but recording a cover and posting it online, different story.
Different story. That goes back to those exclusive rights we were talking about, like the right to reproduce the work, the right to distribute it.
Right, right.
And, even making a copy for your own personal use, like. ripping a CD to your computer.
Hmm.
That's still technically considered copyright infringement in many places.
Even if I never share it with anyone.
Even if you never share it, though there's definitely a lot of debate about whether that should be allowed. It really shows how technology has kind of blurred the lines, right?
It really has. I mean, back in the day, making copies, it was a whole event. Now, it's a click away. No wonder copyright is such a hot topic.
It's the law trying to keep up with technology, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But even with all the debates around copyright in the digital age, there's one thing that most people seem to agree on: the importance of the public domain.
The public domain. That magical realm where copyrights go to, what's the best verb here? Retire, graduate.
I like to think of it as copyrights going to, like, give back. Because when a work enters the public domain, it really is like this incredible gift to the world.
A gift?
Anyone can copy it, share it, build on it, without needing permission or paying anything.
It's like a giant pool of creative potential, just constantly being replenished as new works become available.
Exactly. Shakespeare's plays, Mozart's operas, classic novels, they're all part of this incredible commons that anyone can tap into. The public domain keeps those works alive and well, and sparks new interpretations, new adaptations, new creative endeavors that might not have been possible otherwise.
It's a beautiful cycle. The old inspiring the new, and then the new eventually becoming part of the commons. It makes you wonder, what will people be creating with public domain works 100 years from now?
That's a really cool thing to think about. And thanks to the internet, accessing and using those public domain works has never been easier. You've got sites like Project Gutenberg offering tons of free books for download. And then there's platforms like Wikimedia Commons, a treasure trove of images, audio, video, all in the public domain.
It really is remarkable, when you think about it, how something like copyright, which, let's be honest, started centuries ago as a way to protect the rights of authors and publishers, has evolved into this incredibly complex system.
It has.
It touches on everything from culture to technology to the very way we access and share information.
It's true. It really speaks to the enduring power of ideas and how we grapple with protecting those ideas in a world that never stops changing. And as technology continues to evolve, as new forms of creativity emerge, all those questions about copyright, they're only going to become more important, more complex.
It makes you realize that copyright, it's not just about legalities, it's about striking that balance between encouraging creativity, protecting creators, and making sure that knowledge and culture are accessible to everyone.
It's a balancing act, for sure. And it's one that requires us to keep talking, keep adapting as the world changes.
Well said. Expert speaker, this has been a fascinating deep dive into the world of copyright. Who knew something that sounded so, well, technical could be so interesting and relevant to our lives?
It's been a pleasure exploring it all with you.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. We hope this deep dive has sparked some ideas and maybe even inspired you to learn a little bit more about copyright on your own. Until next time.